They were not defeated. They were sent. By 1944, the vast and brutal tide of the war in the Pacific had turned irreversibly against Imperial Japan. The Allied fleet advanced with overwhelming numerical and technological superiority. Battle after battle, the loss of ships, aircraft, and above all experienced pilots led the High Command to confront an abyss of military desperation. Conventional tactics no longer worked, and the defense of the homeland seemed a lost cause. It was in this scenario of grim inevitability that the military high command conceived a doctrine that would defy all established codes of warfare, the special attack, or tokotai. It was not a containment strategy. It was an act of terminal sacrifice, coldly calculated in the highest command rooms of Tokyo. The imperial leaders knew, with mathematical certainty, that the men selected for these missions would have no chance of survival. The order that emanated from the Admiralty was not for them to fight, but to fulfill a sentence of death. The goal was not victory, but delay and psychological devastation. Against the steel armor and firepower of the American aircraft carriers, the only remaining recourse was to turn the soldier himself into a weapon. Young aviators and sailors, many of them volunteers recruited from university students, were indoctrinated with a rhetoric of honor and divine duty. They received the minimum of instruction, just enough to take off, fly, and dive. Their planes were loaded with high-power explosives, their manned torpedoes designed for a single and final run against the target. The logistics were simple and brutal. There was no need for landing practice. There were no rescue plans. The mission papers were clear. The explosion of their vehicle was the only acceptable result. The superior command not only foresaw the annihilation of these units, it demanded it. They were soldiers chosen to die, sent to fulfill a destiny sealed not by the enemy, but by the desperate strategy of their own generals. The island of Betio, a small but vital outpost on Tarawa Atoll in the Gilbert Islands, had been transformed into an impenetrable fortress by the Japanese garrison, composed mostly of elite units from the Special Naval Landing Force, SNLF. The defensive engineering, supervised by Rear Admiral Keiji Shibazaki, included over 500 interconnected pillboxes and fortifications made of coconut logs and concrete. Crucially, the anti-ship and coastal defense was anchored by batteries of Vickers 8-inch naval guns, captured and repurposed, capable of inflicting catastrophic damage on any landing force. The U.S. assault, Operation Galvanic, was under the command of the United States 2nd Marine Division. The attack plan, which resulted in the command's well-known apprehension regarding the survival rate, stipulated that the 2nd Division, including the 2nd Marine Regiment, would land on the beaches designated Red 1, 2, and 3. The technical operation, critically, depended on a massive naval and aerial barrage to neutralize the strongpoints, followed by a wave of amphibious landing vehicles. However, the main tactical flaw lay in the assessment of the tides and the coral reef surrounding Betio, a natural obstacle that intelligence already knew was dangerous. The preliminary barrage, although intense, failed to destroy the most reinforced pillboxes, and the returning fire from the Japanese coastal guns damaged an American destroyer before the troops even landed. On the morning of November 20th, 1943, the low tide exposed the reef, forcing most LVT landing vehicle-tracked amphibious landing vehicles, which were supposed to cross the barrier, to stop and expose the following waves of LCVPs, landing craft, vehicle, personnel, and other transports. Marines from the 2nd Regiment, including the 2nd Landing Battalion, were forced to wade hundreds of meters of open sea, facing the deadly crossfire of the entrenched Special Naval Landing Forces Type 92, heavy machine guns, and Type 99 rifles. The combination of continuous defensive fire with the exposed positioning on the reef turned the landing zone into a slaughterhouse, with hundreds of casualties in the first minutes of the assault. The High Command's prior knowledge of the task's difficulty confirmed the unit's strategic sacrifice to secure the beachhead, costing the U.S. Expeditionary Force more than 1,000 dead and 2,000 wounded among the Marines alone. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, Supreme Commander of the Japanese defense on Iwo Jima, architected a technical strategy of delayed annihilation, aware that the command did not expect any of his 22,000 men to return alive. This defense was entrusted primarily to soldiers of the 109th Infantry Division and units such as the 145th Infantry Regiment, the latter under the command of Colonel Masuo Ikeda. The military defense abandoned the usual tactic of banzai attacks on the beaches, concentrating on inflicting the maximum possible casualties on the invader through a subterranean defensive system. The core of this strategy was a meticulous network of over 18 kilometers of interconnected tunnels, reinforced concrete bunkers, and artillery and machine gun positions in caves and slopes, especially on Mount Suribachi. The Japanese artillery, which included heavy pieces and 320-meter and 240-meter mortars, was instructed to maintain silence during the extensive naval and aerial pre-invasion bombardment in order to preserve the exact location of the weapons and fire only when the United States Marine Corps, USMC, forces were ashore and in mass. This tactic of controlled and hidden fire maximized the lethality of the defenses against the initial assault waves, transforming the volcanic sand of the island into a minefield and a ruthless slaughterhouse for the American forces, who landed with elements of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th USMC divisions. The mission order, issued in the high echelons of the U.S. Fifth Army, outlined a rescue operation with a human cost that, for the commanders, was a statistical certainty, the sacrifice of an already exhausted unit. The theater of operations was the dense and unforgiving Vosges mountain range in eastern France during October 1944. The unit designated for the practically suicidal mission was the 100th Infantry Battalion, integrated into the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, RCT, a force composed of Nisei soldiers, Japanese Americans, who already carried the heavy burden of a high casualty rate in combat. The tactical objective was to break the encirclement imposed by German forces on the 1st Battalion of the 101st Infantry Regiment, belonging to the 36th Infantry Division, which was isolated and without supplies on a forested hill, having been nicknamed the Lost Battalion. The military operation was marked by a brutal and methodical advance against firmly entrenched German defensive positions, which exploited the mountainous terrain and the low autumn temperatures. For 6 consecutive days, the companies of the 402nd RCT, using hand-to-hand assault tactics and suppression fire from their light weapons, mainly M1 Garand rifles and Browning M1919 machine guns, engaged in continuous combat, gaining ground meter by meter in the foggy forest. The final assault, which culminated in the breaking of the enemy defensive line and reaching the 1st 141st on October 30th, came with a terrible toll. To rescue the approximately 211 encircled men, the 442nd RCT suffered over 400 casualties, including dead and wounded, confirming the command's grim prediction about the nature of the mission. The amphibious attack of August 19th, 1942, codenamed Operation Jubilee, was conceived as a reconnaissance-in-force raid against the port of Dieppe on the occupied French coast, a logistical and tactical test in which the Allied command, although aware of the extreme difficulty, accepted the probability of catastrophic losses. The main assault force was composed of the 2nd Canadian Infantry Division, supported by British troops, and the 14th Canadian Tank Battalion. The tactical plan stipulated simultaneous landings on 6 main beaches, 4 flanking the city and 2 directly on the main strip. The assault on the western and eastern flanks was planned to neutralize the heavy German artillery batteries controlling naval access and the city itself. On Green Beach at Pourville, the South Saskatchewan Regiment and the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders of Canada landed, facing intense initial resistance, but managing to make some penetration, with the objective of advancing inland and attacking the German headquarters in Arques-la-Bataille. However, the element of surprise failed catastrophically on Blue Beach at Puys, where the Royal Regiment of Canada hit the shore late, under growing light and devastating crossfire from fortified German defensive positions on the high cliffs overlooking the extremely narrow beach, resulting in hundreds of immediate casualties and mass captures. Armoured support was crucial for the central thrust on Dieppe Beach, designated White Beach. The Calgary Tank Regiment, employing Churchill Mark III tanks, faced the technical difficulty of crossing a high shingle wall on the beach and the lack of maneuverability in the terrain, with many tanks bogging down or being targeted by German anti-tank guns. The Canadian infantry, including the Mont-Royal Fusiliers, attempted to advance under concentrated fire from MG-34. Machine guns and mortars. With the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry's Churchill, the force failed to break the defensive cordon of the German 302nd Infantry Division. The technical planning underestimated the coastal defense, the nature of the shingle beach, and the air-naval ground coordination, resulting in a massive operational failure where, in a matter of a few hours, Canadian casualties exceeded 3,260 men among dead, wounded and prisoners, a testament to the extreme cost of a mission where retreat for the majority of the personnel became impossible from the moment of landing. The operational plan dictated a brutal focus on the immediate penetration of a fortified German bridgehead on the west bank of the Dnieper River, a critical sector of the Eastern Front. The unit designated for the mission, the 13th Separate Penal Battalion, Strafbat, was composed of about 800 men, all demoted soldiers and officers, armed primarily with the Mosin Nagant M91-30 rifle and RGD-33 grenades, with minimal support from Degtyaryov DP-27 light machine guns. Their technical function was to act as a shock unit to absorb the initial fire from the Wehrmacht's defensive positions and, crucially, to clear the extensive minefields in front of the first-line trench system. Prior fire coordination was deliberately limited to a 15-minute artillery bombardment, carried out by the 113th Howitzer Artillery Regiment, using M30 122mm pieces, more to fix the enemy than to permanently neutralize the German pillboxes. The assault began at 04:30 before full light. The attack formation was in successive waves, about 100 meters apart, forcing the soldiers to advance en masse over the zone of death. The rear of the penal battalion was composed of elements of the Zagraditelnie Otriadi, blocking detachments, NKVD security units equipped with Maxim machine guns, with the strict order to shoot any individual from the Strafbat who attempted to retreat without visible injuries. The main objective of the technical operation was not survival, but the suppression of enemy fire in such a way that the 255th Guards Rifle Regiment, the next regular unit, could exploit the breach and consolidate the bridgehead, advancing from the foothold that the sacrifice had created. The plan for Operation Market Garden in September 1944 assigned the British 1st Airborne Division, commanded by Major General Roy Urquhart, the most distant and dangerous objective, the capture of the main bridge over the Rhine River in Arnhem, Netherlands, a mission the High Command knew carried an unacceptable risk of annihilation. The technical plan required the drop of paratroopers and the landing of Horsa gliders in drop zones and landing zones at a critical distance of 12 kilometers from the target, due to the presence of German anti-aircraft fire near the bridge. This tactical distance, chosen to minimize initial losses of transport aircraft, was, in essence, the fatal error that condemned the regiments. The first assault on September 17th saw the parachute battalions of the 1st, 2nd and 3rd Parachute Regiment, PIR, being dropped, along with elements of the Glider Pilot Regiment, responsible for transporting light artillery pieces and jeeps. However, the unit's Signals Division, vital for tactical coordination, immediately suffered from equipment failures and geographical isolation. The 2nd Parachute Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, was the only one to penetrate the German defensive ring, fortifying itself at the northern end of the Arnhem Bridge. Meanwhile, the 1st and 3rd Battalions, as well as the 156th Parachute Battalion, were brutally intercepted by German armoured units unexpectedly in the area, notably the remnants of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. The lack of effective communication turned the advance of the remaining regiments into a series of isolated and defensive battles in Oosterbeek, where the division was gradually encircled and crushed. After 4 days of siege and incessant bombardment, and with the total exhaustion of ammunition and medical supplies, the final retreat order resulted in the rescue of fewer than 2,400 men out of the approximately 10,000 initial airborne combatants, excluding casualties from the Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade that attempted to reinforce the position. The casualty rate in the 1st Airborne Division exceeded 75%, including 1,175 dead and the loss of all heavy equipment. The division Signals Regiment, for example, recorded over 50% casualties, a technical statistic that underlined the complete operational destruction of the force at Arnhem, a sacrifice where the command knew that the probabilities of success, and consequently of return, were zero. The decision to advance despite the certainty of annihilation fell to the 2nd Battalion of the British Parachute Regiment, a rapid assault airborne unit tasked with the most critical and exposed mission of Operation Market Garden. The capture of the road bridge over the Lower Rhine in Arnhem, Netherlands, in September 1944. Led by Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, the force was composed of approximately 740 men, whose technical focus depended on an initial landing about 13 kilometers west of the main objective. The tactical plan, already compromised by the distance of the landing zones, LZs, and drop zones, DZs, due to misguided concerns about German anti-aircraft artillery, stipulated a rapid advance on foot along the main road, the Utrechtseweg, to isolate and fortify the steel structure of the bridge. The equipment carried by each paratrooper was the Airborne Assault Standard, emphasizing mobility and individual firepower. Lee Enfield No. 4 MKE automatic rifles, Sten Mk2 submachine guns for close-quarters combat, and a limited quantity of PIAT, projector, infantry, anti-tank weapons, a scarcity that would prove fatal against the approaching armor. The 2nd Para managed to be the only battalion of the EDES 1st Parachute Brigade to break the German blockade in its sector, reaching the north side of the bridge on the night of September 17th, but without the Type 22 and Type 68 radio equipment necessary to establish robust communications with division headquarters in Oosterbeek, or with the XXX Army Corps advancing by land. Positioned in improvised fortifications in the houses and buildings around the northern bridgehead, including the school and some corner houses, Frost's force faced the counterattack of elements of the 9th Hohenstaufen and 10th Frundsberg SS Panzer Divisions, elite units that were unexpectedly in Arnhem for a period of rest. The fighting was conducted at close range, where the regiment's discipline and assault training were tested against the armour of the Panzers IV and Sturmgeschütz III that used the bridge structure as a stronghold. Without effective communication, close air support, and with critically reduced ammunition and medical supplies, the command knew the position was untenable. The resistance lasted 4 days and 4 nights, a calculated sacrifice that, although it did not secure the bridge for the main advance, managed to fix German armoured reserves in place, proving the high cost of a mission where the tactical objective supplanted the probability of survival of the executing unit. The plan for Operation Chariot, a British amphibious attack on the heavily defended port of Saint-Nazaire in occupied France, was conceived under the technical assumption that the return of the main force would be highly improbable. The strategic objective was the neutralization of the only dry dock capable of receiving the German battleship Tirpitz on the Atlantic coast, the massive Normandy dock. For the mission, the Old Town-class destroyer HMS Campbelltown was selected, which underwent crucial modifications. The bow was reinforced with steel plates, and its profile was altered to resemble a German vessel, aiming to deceive enemy observation posts. At its heart, the Campbelltown carried a demolition charge of over 4 tons of the powerful explosive Amatol, hidden inside a concrete vault under the forecastle, configured with 8-hour time fuses, ensuring the explosion even if the crew was captured. The assault force was composed of about 250 men, predominantly from No. 2 Commando Regiment, led by Lieutenant Colonel Newman and Royal Navy teams. The approach through the Loire estuary on the morning of March 28, 1942, was supported by a flotilla of 16 motor launches, MLs, which transported the commando teams and aimed to land near the dock to destroy vital installations such as the engine rooms and the gate-winding towers. Aboard the Campbelltown, the only remaining weapons were a 20mm Oerlikon automatic cannon at the stern and another to starboard, intended for last-minute defense, with most of the main guns removed for weight relief. The technical plan required the Campbelltown to crash into the south gate of the Normandy dock at a speed of 10 knots, functioning as a ram and ultimately as a time bomb. The success of the mission was intrinsically linked to the ship's self-destruction and the almost certain elimination of the landing force. The attack order issued by the Tactical Command designated the 22nd Infantry Regiment of the U.S. 4th Infantry Division for the main offensive, a crucial and high-risk part of Operation Queen, which began on November 16, 1944. The technical goal was to penetrate the first defensive line of the Siegfried Line, West Wall, concentrating the effort in the sector of dense forest and rugged terrain of the Hürtgen Forest, near the German-Belgian border. The operational plan required progression through compact forest sectors, where American air and armored superiority would be nullified by the dense vegetation and constant fog, turning the combat into a series of platoon and company engagements. The advance was to occur under the heavy fire of entrenched German positions, composed of reinforced concrete pillboxes and semi-submerged shelters, defended by the remaining but determined 275th Volksgrenadier Division, in addition to elements of the Wehrmacht's LX6X Army Corps. The command was aware that every meter traveled in the concentration area, notably in the Death Valley, Caul Trail, would be paid for with an unsustainable cost of casualties, given the saturation of the area by German artillery fire, mainly 105mm and 150mm howitzers, and the intricate network of shrapnel mine, S-mine, anti-tank and anti-personnel minefields. The predicted attrition rate far exceeded acceptable limits, but the need to fix German forces and reach the Ruhr River dams to the east imposed the cold, calculated decision to sacrifice the regiment's effective combat capability in exchange for a minimal positional gain, solidifying the perception among junior officers and the troops that for that mission, return was not a viable option. The smoke cleared, and with it any doubt. The fatality rate, coldly calculated by the High Command, was confirmed. 100%. None of the men chosen for death returned. Their posthumous medals were sent to now silent homes, where families tried to fit bravery into the cruel reality of having been deliberately betrayed by their own leaders. The fate of those involved is a grim study in contrasts. For the soldiers, certain death and historical anonymity, their true stories stifled by the nation's need for heroism. For the officers in the comfort of the barracks, history was more lenient. The tactical success of the mission, albeit at a hideous cost, ensured that most escaped any significant punishment, justified under the mantle of military necessity and total war. The architects of death were, in many cases, decorated or promoted. The price of victory was paid not with spontaneous courage, but with the forced and premeditated sacrifice of lives. And this is the haunting legacy of chosen for death, the thin line between desperate tactics and pure contempt for human life. Was their sacrifice in vain, or was it a terrible necessity? It is time for you to decide. Was it strategy or murder? Who is the real culprit?